The United States of America are perhaps the most powerful country in Hearts of Iron 4. However, it can be quite daunting for newer players to come to grips with this country, so that is what this guide is for. Let's get going. This is a 1936 start, and we will play the US of A. We'll turn Iron Man mode on with historical AI focuses, and we'll leave things at regular difficulty. This is what most people play at, though this still works if you bump it up to veteran or even elite if you really want to torture yourself. So what makes the US so great for a new player is the fact that it has won the geographical lottery. It has no dangerous borders with Canada to the north and Mexico to the south. Mexico is more likely to go to war with itself than to threaten you, and Canada is always friendly. Anyone else is miles away in Europe or miles away in Asia, and you are guarded by perhaps the single largest fleet in the game with the capacity to make it even bigger. Now, it does have some drawbacks. One of those being the Great Depression. This really does hurt your political power gain and your overall country. It's not great. And we are currently stuck on undisturbed isolation, a really bad economy law that we cannot manually transition out of easily, so we'll have to get rid of that. Fortunately, we have a focus tree, so let's start by taking a look at the focus tree. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on what everything does here. We'll just lay out a path that should work for you in a historical context. This is a historical game, mostly historical, so we're not going any meme paths. I can make videos on those later. Let's just do the basics, and the basics start with continuing the New Deal. But I got ahead of myself there, just cancel it. Before we get to the New Deal, we have to take a look at Congress, the House, and the Senate. As in American politics, they're annoying, and the USA has to manage Senate and House support. Easiest way to do that at the start of the game, when you still have nothing spent, no political power being used on anything, click medium lobbying effort so you can start building support in Senate and the House. You can see your PP has just gone down, and now we can select national focus. If we do it the other way around, due to game mechanics, it doesn't work. So first, do the lobbying effort, then pick the focus. Research. USA has a long time to go before it goes to war, so we can focus heavily on industry. That leaves us with one slot. Now, there are several options. You can use that slot for your Air Force. However, we're not really threatened with war anytime soon, and anything you build at this point will be outdated by then. Same goes for the artillery, same goes for the armor, same goes for anything infantry related. However, what we can invest in, but you don't have to, is the Navy. The US Navy is big enough at the start of the game that you don't really need to invest into it heavily. If you don't want to play the naval game and don't care about the meta, all I recommend you research is damage control, this branch, and fire control methods, this branch, and all of the ammunition types located under these battery types. What these do is increase the damage the various ships do. Damage control just means your ships are less likely to blow up, and then fire control again increases the damage your ships do. Those tech lines improve the ships you already have without needing to make a massive investment or think about it too much. Now, if you are looking to play a little bit of a naval game, I recommend we start out by getting improved torpedo launchers so our destroyers can pack a little bit more of a punch, and also picking up active sonar so we can finally find those annoying submarines the AI tends to use. Let's start with the improved torpedo launchers. The USA starts with 10 military factories. Not all that much, but fortunately war is very far off. So what we do here is make a little bit of support equipment. We'll always need this, and it doesn't ever go out of date. We have interwar carrier fighters. These are terrible. Carrier fighters don't actually work the way they're supposed to. So if you're watching this before the release of By Blood Alone, just take your carrier fighters, throw them away, and replace them by, let's say, carrier naval bombers. Not only are they better planes because they're naval bomber ones, they actually do something. That leaves us with 4 extra factories. The USA could use some trucks, so we'll put 2 factories on trucks. Trucks never go out of date, and you do need them for just your basic logistics. And the remaining factories can be spent on getting towed anti-air. Getting a good amount of towed anti-air produced early is always good. There is never a case where towed anti-air is worthless. If you can produce it, do so. And the final factory can either go towards extra towed anti-air or some more infantry equipment. I usually like to produce a little bit of infantry equipment. Now, we also have some ships in here. What I like to do is just put everything down to a single dockyard first, and then let's have a look around. The Wichita class is, I'm sorry to say, not very good, and it takes too long to be built. So I tend to delete this one. You don't have to if you don't want to. If you have some sort of emotional attachment to the Wichita class cruiser, I don't, so bye-bye. The rest of the ships, I usually leave them to produce. It's they're cheap enough. But it's better if we can start by dragging the heavy ships, the big ships, down to the bottom of the list. I know it's a little bit clunky. I wish Paradox had some better controls for this. And at the top here are all the destroyers. What we do now is start filling these out. So every time a destroyer finishes, the factories filter down to the next one, to the next one, to the next one, and it will get a cascading effect as these factories finish. And as a result, everything will be built more quickly because the screening vessels are a lot faster to produce than these heavy ships. Now, construction. We could build civilian factories. Let's say here. Problem is, look at that penalty. A 50% penalty. That is horrific. What about mills then? Maybe we can start building mills. Again, 50% penalty. It's really not worth it at the start. What is worth it though is building infrastructure. Infrastructure, let me demonstrate here in Texas. If we build infrastructure, not only will we increase the speed at which more buildings are built, we also get more resources out of that state. So we will be building up maximum infrastructure in the states that have resources we need and a lot of building slots. Texas has oil and a ton of aluminum, and then we just go around looking for places that have a lot of aluminum, tungsten, or a combination of many resources. Like Nevada here has a lot of different resources, and we just maximize the infrastructure in those regions. 36 divisions. We're gonna unassign this one, the big red 1 division, just because it's the first. I don't know, it's a mental thing for me. And delete the other 35. That leaves us with the 1 division. They are currently this template. We're gonna change their template to the National Guard division, which is a bigger template. They're not good in combat, but they are perfect for what we're about to do. We're just gonna hit this button and leave them to exercise permanently. This is what used to be called the 1 division training trick. It doesn't work for most nations because it needs time to kick into high gear and become worth it. The USA is one of those nations that actually has the time. It takes about 6 to 7 months for this to start generating a respectable amount of experience, because as you can see, this is 0.004 daily XP. That's nothing. However, once we get this train rolling, we will get much more. What we do now is, as we get more army experience, just gonna make this template bigger and bigger and bigger until this entire block is filled with infantry, and you will watch the army XP pour in. Now, the Air Force. We do have a sizable Air Force, but we're not going to be using it anytime soon, so I usually just park it in my biggest airfield in California. And that is the basics done. That is how we start the game, and now we unpause and we wait. Most of the US gameplay is just a waiting game. Oh, and don't worry about this. The insufficient resources are rubber and chromium. Rubber for your trucks and chromium for your 2 carriers here. It doesn't matter. You can trade for it if you want to. Maybe the chromium, but the lack of resources really is not as intense as you think it might be. As the USA, you will get a variety of events like this one. This one is great because we get extra support. However, there are also events that will take away support. So this is an annoying mechanic, but I suppose politics are annoying. The reason why Congress is important is throughout the focus tree, you will see limitations on requirements for focuses. Like this one, it requires a certain amount of senators and representatives of the House to be in favor of your government. If you fail that, you cannot take the focus. And every time one of these focuses finishes, people resent you for some reason and go into opposition. I have no idea why. It is what it is. That is why we will use things like small and medium lobbying efforts throughout the game to keep House and Senate support high. It's a cost. Oh, God. This is one of those events I mentioned earlier. It's a cost the US player has to pay to play the game, apparently. Fun fact, the US starts with almost 160 civilian factories, of which they need to use 129 just for consumer goods. So yeah, that undisturbed isolation is pretty terrible. Anyway, now with that first focus done, we are going to do that trick again. We're doing another medium lobbying effort, because as you can see, we don't really have overwhelming support in the House. I would like to have that support. And then we will select the WPA. We'll take WPA, Agricultural Adjustment Act, and then we will reconvene. As for the political power we have available to us, we are now going to hire Robert Taft, the silent workhorse, just to get our daily political power moving. It's moving down currently, but we'd like to fix that. Select all of your ships and park them under 1 navy. Right-click whichever navy you want to, and all the other ships will reinforce there and will just form into a single giant ball of death. We can set that to exercises. Our initial research will be focused on keeping the industry up to date. We can safely ignore synthetics, except for maybe fuel refining as our Navy and Air Force grow, but usually the US is fine for oil. We also want to keep engineering up to date, and then as we get more research slots, we can work on the artillery, we can work on the infantry equipment, and of course, the armor. We finished the WPA, now we get Agricultural Adjustment Act, after which we will take a little detour into Suspend the Persecution and reach out to the Ware Group. The Ware Group gives access to a couple of cheap, by cheap I mean free, advisors like this guy, Production Efficiency Cap, not bad. The Editor, PP Gain and Stability, pretty good. And the Financial Expert, also pretty good, 5% consumer goods, love that. We also have a bunch of political power again, and we're gonna make use of that. You know, I said that we have infinite naval experience. We're gonna quickly select the integrated designers, switch out to flexible contracts, go into our ship designer and hire a ship designer. Now, also while we're waiting to continue down the focus tree, I know that there are a couple of stability hits around the corner, such as Suspend the Persecution, 5% stability hit, and giving refuge to scientists also takes stability hits. Now, at this point, I like to pick improved worker conditions just to preempt our next choices. We are going to give refuge to German scientists, maybe even Italian scientists, and we are going to suspend the persecution. That is about 10 to 15 stability we're going to lose. We can take that hit, but I want to keep stability as high as possible as it directly affects consumer goods, political power gain, factory and dockyard output. All right, we have our active sonar. What are we going to do now? What I am going to do is design a new destroyer. Destroyers are vital to the current meta. Now, this is all before By Blood Alone, so this might be changed by the time you're watching this, but what you want to do is pick a destroyer. 1936 is fine, and we're going to make some changes to it. We'll put the best engine possible on it, the best torpedo possible on it. We're going to add sonar so I can find those annoying submarines. We're going to add one anti-submarine warfare thing here, depth charges. You don't have to. I think your basic destroyers have this already, but if you don't, make sure you have this so you can actually sink those submarines you're finding. And we're going to add the cheapest light battery possible. This is a fully featured destroyer, and it will serve as our main screening force. The purpose of these ships is to, 1, get in the way of the enemy navy. They will protect your capital ships. And 2, once your capital ships have finished smashing the enemy's escort ships, these torpedo launchers are going to wreak havoc on the enemy's capital ships. They make a very good 1-2 combo currently with heavy cruisers. I'll show you the heavy cruiser later. So I'm gonna start producing these, and the convoys can go. We'll build more convoys later. All right, we have the Agricultural Adjustment Act done. Now, we cannot continue to Fair Labor Standards Act and Federal Housing Act because there is a small cooldown associated with it. Legislation takes a while to finish, so we'll need to do something else. That is why we are now going to suspend the persecution and take a little trip down the communist path and reach out to the Ware Group for those free advisors I mentioned earlier. And then we come to 1936, November elections. This one always happens. This is where you choose between historical and ahistorical gameplay. This will be a historical run, so we're not gonna do any shenanigans. That means we pick the top options. The Democrats win the election, more stability, and a nice bit of infrastructure construction speed. Hurrah, the people have spoken. Unfortunately, let's go up here and unpause. Maybe the event hasn't kicked in, but this tends to destroy your house support, so this is going to update eventually. What that event does is really wreck house support, so make sure you keep an eye on house support and keep doing your lobbying efforts and your farm subsidies so you can at least continue down your focus tree. And again, we have a lot of political power and we have a lot of stability. Might not be a bad time to invite ourselves some scientists. Germans or Italians, doesn't matter. I do have a little bit of army experience. I'm going to use that to add a couple more infantry to this template. Just going to keep making this bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. From this point forward, we're also going to get events like this one, where senators ask for stuff in exchange for support. We can either ignore it, which I don't recommend, or you can give in to their demands. In this case, they want me to build a new munitions plant in North Carolina, and if I do so, I get 10 senators and 50 representatives in support. I just need to make sure I build that factory within a year. So let's build a mill in North Carolina, drag it to the top here, and it should be built within a year. Perfect. So those are usually worth doing, especially if you see house support kind of floundering. All right, we have reached out to the Ware Group, which is great. That allows us to hire Harry White for free, 5% consumer goods, and we can also hire Whittaker Chambers here for 5% political power gain. It's not that huge, but he is free, and also 5% stability. I could replace him later if I feel like I don't really need him anymore, and I can get the economist, but the production efficiency cap right now doesn't really do anything for us. Our factories are so limited that this only affects mills, so we have 10 of them. This really isn't going to pay for anything. While the extra political power gain might be helpful, and the extra stability means I can take refuge to Italian scientists later on, should I so choose. As for focuses, we can now get ourselves an extra research slot. That's always a good idea while we wait for the fair labor standards. Again, we can take it because legislation is still being drafted and we need more support. So again, keep your eye on support. Another thing you might want instead of the research slot, I don't recommend it though, is to go over here and get the War Department. The War Department has a few things under it that are interesting. The Selective Training Act can be very powerful as it sets your base war support to 10%. So with a couple of tricks, you can get like 15% war support out of this focus. Or we can go down the Air War Plans division and down to escort fighters, giving you a very large bonus to heavy fighters. Usually heavy fighters are not great, but with this you can get them way ahead of time, and heavy fighters actually perform well in the Pacific because of the massive ranges involved. I'm not going to do that this run, just going to keep it conservative. We're going to keep it nice and easy and get the research slots. And you can see the army experience flooding in. This is a far cry from what we had at the start of the game. This is definitely worth it. While we're swimming in naval experience, let's quickly go over the doctrines, shall we? Again, it doesn't really matter too much. If you're not playing a naval game, each one of these will do just fine. It's okay, your navy's big enough for none of this to really matter. However, if you want to focus a little bit more on navy, and if you're playing into the current meta, like I am, it might not be the best idea to go base strike. Base strike is good. It supports your carrier focus very well. The US starts with a lot of carriers, has the potential to build many more, but carriers right now just are not as strong as they could be. And the downside of base strike is it does have some bonuses to destroyers, but it has virtually no bonuses to heavy cruisers. That's why we are far better off in the current meta to pick either trade interdiction, which does have several bonuses to heavy cruisers, or fleet in being, which is a more balanced approach, possibly. I prefer trade interdiction because it just really allows you to shred enemy convoys and enemy navies alike. And in the raw numbers, I think trade interdiction ends up on top, but you don't have to feel forced into either one. Let's just go with fleet in being. I prefer to just go with trade interdiction. It has a lot of targeting in it. I just think this is overall the best. While we're here, you know this one here, the Bureau of Ordnance, this is what US starts with. It's a straight up debuff to your torpedoes. You might want to get rid of this. You don't have to do it right away, but since we're swimming in naval experience anyway, I recommend picking night fighting. The spotting and attack are nice, but the visibility is always great. All right, so we've got our extra research slot. Let's put it to work. The industry again is being worked on. Let's go get radios. As for focuses, we still cannot take the Fair Labor Standards Act because they're still drafting legislation. It's gonna take a bunch more days, so let's instead hop over here and take that War Department we discussed earlier. Now in terms of research, we've just finished off the industry. We're still working on engineering. Anything else here is ahead of time, a bit too much for my liking. So at this point, we can go for air. Air, there are currently two philosophies. One is just fighters and CAS. They are the dream team. They work very well, but as the US, you will be fighting Asia. So you'll be fighting against Japan, which means the Pacific, very long ranges. So as the US, it might be worth going for heavy fighters and tactical bombers instead. Personally, I just don't like heavy fighters. I know that we can get the next level of heavy fighter way ahead of time. I just don't like them. So personally, I am going for these fighters and I'll just upgrade their range manually. Second slot, I'm going to put on tactical bombers because these are going to be very useful. Tactical bombers are pretty good at playing the CAS role and they just have massive range. As far as construction is concerned, we have built that initial line of infrastructure, and if we take a look around, I think we've got most states that produce a respectable amount of aluminum and tungsten, so found a couple more. Once these finish, we'll start working on civilian factories. Yes, we'll still have the penalty to civilian factories, but we'll get rid of that soon enough once we can get to the arsenal of democracy and the giant wakes. There we go. We finished the War Department and we can now continue on to the Fair Labor Standards Act. Now, before we move on, there is another neat little trick that we could play at the expense of not being able to send an attaché to China right away. What do I mean by that? Well, you can see here we have 6% war support. Pretty bad, right? And 5% of that comes from our Pride of the Fleet. What we could do is go to our Navy, select the Pride of the Fleet, and make it no longer our Pride of the Fleet. We would just have no pride. And as a result, we would lose 5% war support. Sounds terrible. That would put us at 1% war support, and it would cost us 100 political power. Yes, I know. What we can do then is go over here and pick Selective Training Act. This one we'll set our base war support up to 10%. No matter how low it was, it will become 10% once we do this. As a result, we essentially get 9% war support for free. And on top of that, with another 100 political power, we can then assign a new pride of the fleet, and we will be at 15% war support, and that is without counting all of the world tension that is still going to pop in. As a result, we might actually, just maybe, be able to get to, where are we here? This one, the giant wigs, a little bit sooner, as this requires 30% war support. Now, that is a little bit memey, and it does require us to delay sending the attaché to China, so I'm not gonna do that, but this is a line of thought worth considering. I'm gonna do Selective Training Act, and just before it finishes, I'm going to, oh, there we go. I'm going to unassign my pride of the fleet. All right, things have kicked off in China, so let's just send an attaché. That will give us 10% war. Oh, I see what the problem is. You know that whole thing I explained earlier? Yeah, that really only works if you do this before the war in China kicks off. This is not going to be as valuable as I thought it would be. And we have finished our focus. That means we cannot continue to the Federal Housing Act. What we could do now is head into Neutrality Act, Arsenal of Democracy, and then eventually the Giant Wakes, or we could head into Selective Training Act. However, if we do this, we have to wait 70 days to send an attaché to China. I think it's worth it. I think it would have even been worth it to take Selective Training Act before taking Fair Labor Standards Act. You can argue about it. I'd still think it's probably worth it. All right, Selective Training Act is about to finish. That will bump us up to 10% war support. So if we had done Selective Training Act before we did Fair Labor Standards Act, it would have a bigger return, but it's not something I can guarantee you being able to do due to the amount of support you need from the House. We've been lucky with getting a lot of positive events and not needing to do too many lobbying efforts. You might not be that lucky, so I cannot guarantee you being able to do this every time. There, you can see our war support has shot up. Base war support is 10%, along with whatever world tension. That brings us up to 14%. Now, let us pick our next focus, Neutrality Act. We are going to talk to China. We're going to send them an attaché. Perfect. That's another 10%. That brings us up to 24%. Let's talk to our Navy guys. And where were we? We'll pick the USS Enterprise here. Love that ship. And she can be the pride of the fleet. Another 5% war support. And that puts us pretty close to the required 30% war support for the Giant Wakes. World tension is going to get us there. And now with our attaché in place, our army experience is just going to explode. Perfect. Template's also done, so this is the perfect training template, 50 with infantry. All this has to do is draw in more army experience. As far as research is concerned, it's late 37, so I've got my fighters, I've got my tactical bombers, gonna go towards the next tank, so I'm gonna start work on tanks so we can get the 1940s produced relatively early, and keep an eye on anything else like computing machine here. And now that we have our attaché in place, we can start using that command power to hire military staff. Obvious picks are Mark Clark, the infantry expert, the army logistics expert's also good, and if you want to focus really on the infantry, you can get the commando expert, but I don't really use Marines all that often. It's also a good choice to pick the tactical bombing expert for your tacticals, or the carrier expert, or, well, whatever really. The choice is yours, just make sure you get the infantry expert and the army logistics expert. As far as the chief of the army, Dwight Eisenhower is always the choice here. Who doesn't like Dwight? That's the Neutrality Act done. Time for the Arsenal of Democracy, the US of A. And with Arsenal of Democracy in, that should give us a couple more military factories. We're going to assign those on to making a couple of fighters, fighter 1s. They're not that great, but we'll be making fighter 2s soon enough, and I can upgrade them as well, just so we can fill out our deficits, and anything extra can go onto either towed anti-air and just support equipment so we can start building some stockpiles. Maybe a little bit of towed artillery as well. From now on, mostly we're going to be building infantry equipment, towed artillery, and support equipment, so something like this. And then as we get more and more factories, we can just exponentially ramp up. The US will have no problems with military factories. You don't even have to choose, just bake stuff. Make all the stuff, trust me. As for focuses, time for the Giant to wake up. This is going to remove that isolation law and give us the power of being a real country. This is going to supercharge our economy. There we go. Early 1938, and we've just researched 1940 cruisers. So I'm gonna make a design. Again, we're making the same design as we did earlier. One heavy battery, the cheapest one. Top row full of these rapid fire guns, light cruiser batteries. Down here, we can add another secondary battery. No armor, best engine possible. We could add radar. This is sonar. So now that is what we want essentially. The only thing that I have cheated with a little bit is I picked fire control 0, the bad one. Trust me, I'll make it. I'll explain. Now we're producing these 1940 cruisers with the bad fire controls. As you can see, they have the coastal designer, meaning they're cheap. Once they've all been produced, or the number that I want has been produced, I am going to go back into the officer corps, go back to flexible contracts, and hire somebody else. Maybe the Atlantic Fleet designer or the Pacific Fleet designer. It doesn't really matter. I can pick whichever one of these I would want. After which I change the design a little bit. I go back to my new fancy cruisers, upgrade their fire control from 0 to 1, and they would have the new designer applied, and it would be a measly 350 cost to refit, meaning it's very quick. But we can make it even quicker by then going here and pick naval refit yards, meaning I can refit an entire fleet in record time, having them built quickly and still having them perform optimally, just because we have all that Navy experience. But I'll show you in a bit. There you go, the giant wakes finishes, and now we move on to the Federal Housing Act and get rid of the Great Depression. Suddenly we have a lot more civilian factories at our disposal. This is a lot better already, and it's gonna get even more glorious once we can ramp up to partial mobilization. Now we have 150 political power. It's time to go to partial mobilization and lock the full might of the US of A. And look at that. That is a lot of factories building civilian factories. It's actually a little bit too many, so I'm gonna let the ones that have something invested in them build. And let's put it down to 1 factory each. This is more than enough, trust me. You can build a little bit more, it doesn't really hurt. But from this point forward, we are going to militarize, and we're going to militarize heavily by building military factories in every state that has high development and that has free slots. And oh boy, the US is truly going to be the arsenal of democracy in this game. And with the Federal Housing Act, that essentially gets rid of all those terrible debuffs. We've just got the Neutrality Act, but that one really doesn't matter. What we can do now is get wartime industry. It's not that great. We could get scientist haven, another research slot. It's pretty useful, but again, nothing perfect. Military construction gets us a lot of military factories and some army XP, and the USACE projects, again, more military factories and XP. These two are pretty good, but there are also options here. We can build a lot of military factories on our own. What this branch here offers, though, is even better. Two Ocean Navy Act. If you're into the naval game, this is going to give you a lot of naval dockyards, with the Bureau of Ships giving you cheaper ships, which is always good. Air War Plan Divisions is going to give you a lot of bonuses to both production and research for your aircraft. And under the Selective Training Act, we have Rock Island towards tank experiments for bonuses there, and just overall really good bonuses. I'm going to go down to tank experiments so I can get to work on my armor tech. You pick whatever you want. At this point, it's mostly just going to be getting the focuses here and picking up all the bonuses that you feel are appropriate in this branch. There's no reason to hold your hand. You still have plenty of time to get all of these that you want. You can totally ignore the Two Ocean Navy Act if you're not into the naval stuff at all. Air War Plans Division is pretty good though. I would recommend going down here to Tactical Bomber Effort and US Army Air Force. And here as well, main battle tanks. This is also pretty nice. One more thing, now that we are off undisturbed isolation, the law's gone, you can't see it anymore. We could finally start work on the agency, the OSS. Why are we waiting for that until now? Well, one, we now have a lot of civs available, so we can easily do this. And two, undisturbed isolation has a huge 100% penalty to any agency upgrade, meaning it's really not worth doing this early. Speaking about agency, my usual choices are cryptology, with as much of it as I can, the unfortunately named pills, invisible ink, and then army, economy, and Air Force Department. The rest is okay, doesn't really matter. It's time to replace this editor by the Economist. 5% production efficiency cap does end up being considerably better in the long run. Our first spy, personally, I'm just going to put him in Japan. While we're doing our build-up, let's have a look at the Philippines. The Philippines is going to be a bit of a flashpoint in the coming war, and we want to be prepared. So what I like to do is just plug in railways here. So the the island is actually connected. Otherwise, a lot of this will have to go via sea. And trust me, the Japanese are going to be sinking a lot of your stuff. Oh. Well, so much for my agent. All right, there goes the naval treaty, so that's good. And Europe is embroiled in war. We'll be arriving at that party soon enough. Once 1940 rolls in, we'll start building up an army, we'll reorganize our navy, and we'll really get ready to start throwing punches. Speaking of throwing punches, we've also built the railway most of the way in the Philippines. We're building the dockyards or the naval bases. Probably not a bad idea to also build up an air base there because, you know, getting to Japan is going to be important. Now, as you can see, the refitting is done very, very quickly. I've also thrown a bunch of destroyers in there by accident. Like a lot of destroyers in here by accident. They shouldn't matter. They take 9 days each, so I think I should be able to get all of that done before things get critical. And if it doesn't, I can just delete them. You don't have to do any of this naval stuff. Now that we have our mech research, let's also design the armor template that should win us the war. I get a lot of criticism about my templates that they're not optimal. I know they're not optimal. I don't know what optimal is these days because they change everything that used to be optimal. Generally, the rule of thumb here is keep organization over 30, around 30, and get as many armored units in here as you can at the same time. So balance between mech and armor until you get to around 30 organization should be okay. This is going to be a very, very expensive unit, but it is going to win us the war. Very expensive in terms of production. And with that, we can start producing our actual army. So how many of these will I need? Well, a lot. Now, the quickest way to get these units out is not to train them like this. I'm limited by training 100,000 men. It's going to take forever. What I'm going to do instead is go into our division designer, create something new, and just a single infantry battalion. There we go. This is very small, but I can train a whole lot of these babies, and I want to train as many of them as possible. I want to train a full army group. So how many is that? 120? Let's start with 101 and go from there. And we're just gonna force deploy them whenever they're ready. And as we finish military factories, we queue up fresh ones. We always need more mills. We're gonna pick up wartime industry next. That will unlock the General Motors industrial concern, giving us another 5% factory output. And we're really gonna start churning out military equipment. Fighters, bombers, cannons, tanks, everything. And our first batch here is ready to be force deployed. Just force deploy them, convert the template into the infantry division we designed, and we should be able to equip all of them. There we go. Now the Big Red 1 division no longer serves a purpose. It can also be the standard infantry template, and we're gonna start assigning these things to, you know, be actual armies now. So I'll need about 18 more. Give me one army group, and I can work with that. These guys can all be put under a field marshal. Best one I've got is probably going to be Eisenhower for his logistics wizard. MacArthur is also not bad. The generals you assign don't really matter too much. They're all pretty good. And these boys can now all exercise until trained, because they're going to need it. All of their XP has been wiped out by the conversion, but this is the quick way to get yourself a real army. I could train them over in the USA, but I'd like to have them available, you know, in the Philippines, where they will have to do significant amounts of heavy lifting. So I'm going to start deploying these armies to the Philippines, where they will be serving as port guards while they prepare for the invasion. It is 1940 now, so it's about time we start looking towards naval techs, and specifically naval invasion tech, just so we can invade a little quicker. Throw some more men at the Japanese. Speaking of more men, we are still recruiting additional divisions, and we're going to start adding some tanks to the mix. These will take a while to build, but a run of 12 should be able to get enough stuff built before. Now this looks terrible. We're lacking a lot of tanks and mech, but we should be able to produce quite a few of those. We are still heavily mobilizing our industry. And we have our wartime industry. That means we've unlocked another great industrial concern, General Motors. The industrial research speed is not that relevant, but 5% extra factory output. Well, we're gonna pump out so many tanks. And the Marine Corps will be led by, I think the Commando is a pretty good choice here, Lucian Truscott, or Alexander Patch. I think Patch is the best choice. Supply consumption is always a good idea. And I'm gonna draw my Marines down to northern Philippines. And with these Marines now in the field, I'm going to send them to the naval base in Apari, northern Philippines, and we are going to be hitting Nagasaki and bring an end to the Japanese. So the tanks we're producing, I'll just put under patent. I'll keep them around Washington for now. Once we join the Allies, I'm going to funnel all of them over to the UK. We shouldn't need tanks for Japan. Besides, the terrain isn't optimal. Roosevelt versus Wilkie. Why would we ever want to get rid of Roosevelt, really? Due to the sheer economic might of the USA, we're actually able to refit most, if not all, of our destroyers. Oh, Japan is gonna be having such a bad day here. And now we've actually finished up almost every destroyer. We're just gonna be building more convoys. This is a respectable amount, but more is always better. And afterwards, we can produce more of our cruisers and more of our newer destroyers, should we choose. Now, because we know Japan is coming, it is March of 1941. Time for War Plan Orange. That should give us a bunch of bonuses against Japan. You don't need them. I'm mostly doing this because I've, well, run out of good stuff to take. We've done everything that is relevant. There's a lot of Navy stuff left, but really our fleet is more than big enough. And there's a couple of bonuses left here that aren't really that important. Women's Integration Act is pretty good. 2% recruitable pop though. And there we go. Japan has declared war on the Philippines. And conveniently, we've just finished War Plan Orange. So we are now at war with Japan. We're going to pull our fleet back. Should have had these babies in port. We'll put them on naval invasion support. So we're going to pull our fleet back to Luzon. We didn't get a warning like up top here that Japan was justifying against us or our puppet. That's a little annoying. So first things first, we're going to pull the fleet back to port so they can recover some organization. Do not send a fleet out when it's low on orc. It will lose and you'll regret it. So they're going to go back and recover. As for the Air Force, they can go on logistics strike, close air support, and maybe some naval strike. And I'll use the tacticals here to start wreaking havoc on the Japanese. And yeah, the Japanese immediately launch a series of invasions. They are quite pointless, if I'm honest. Like, they're not going to get anywhere. Anyway, with our navy recovered, I'm going to split them in half. That way we'll have a little more flexibility. Two massive navies giving us easy naval invasion supremacy, so we should be able to launch everything at once. Our Air Force is up, and I'm going to make sure that they are there to support the naval invasions. And now we simply launch. Should not be a real issue here. What is unfortunate is my naval invasion of Taiwan did not go as planned. Again, doesn't matter in the slightest because our naval invasion of pretty much anywhere else has gone off without a hitch, and we can do whatever we want now. So as we take ports, make sure to bring up the reinforcements and go to town. So we've established 2 respectable beachheads, and this really is all we're gonna need. Taken the area around Osaka and the area around, what is this, Nagasaki. And from there, we'll simply crush the Japanese. They're still overcommitted in China. They will not have any time to bring enough troops home. And we're still struggling a little with the Royal Navy. Wait, the Imperial Navy. But that should all disappear soon enough. And Japan is steadily being crushed by the sheer weight of American numbers. They might be able to mount a small defense for a little bit, but air is going to start crushing them. We are sinking whatever they're putting out to sea, and we're sinking it in significant numbers. All in all, really not much of a challenge. Look at them crumble. Look at them crumble. America, land of the free, home of the brave. It really, like, they don't stand a chance. There we go. Now for a quick peace deal, just gonna make this as not stupid as possible. All right, peace deal reasonable. We've just turned Japan democratic and given Korea also a sort of democratic leader. Japan hasn't even gone to war with the European colonizers. Oh, Japan. Anyway, China gobbled up the rest. China should be fine now. And this is where we bring all of our boys home. And by home, I mean the United Kingdom. Now, the biggest wait here is just waiting for all of these troops to make it to the United Kingdom. That's the hardest part. It's waiting. Well, all in all, naval invasion seems to be off to a good start. And there we go. We have taken a port. That means we can start expanding. Note, I am only committing a fraction of my forces, and it should be more than enough to deal with whatever Germany has here. They are quite busy screwing up Operation Barbarossa, so we will have pretty much free reign in France for a couple of months at least before they can redeploy troops. This entire region, along with all of Vichy France's territories and its troops and its navies, will flip to Free France, so it's always worth rushing for Paris. And our armor is just shredding their units. Meanwhile, Encircle and Destroy is the name of the game. Destroy as many German units before they're able to withdraw back into Germany and just make your life a little bit easier while giving the Germans a very, very hard time. Let's see if we can break through here. Our tanks are really good. It's just a very narrow gap to push through. It might be better to just wait for my Marines to make the naval landing happen. Italy is now effectively going to be cut in half. I'm going to move my armor into that breach. That way I don't have to worry about fighting my way through the mountains with them. And the Marines will make that gap a little bit wider. The armor is already underway. This should be a lot of fun once we get there. And this is the final death rattle of Italy. Bye-bye, Italy. Bye-bye. Pushing my tanks north to make use of the fact that everybody here is out of position. And I'm pushing my Marines south because it's a very narrow front and the Marines will be more than capable of dealing with whatever's down there. Meanwhile, Omar Bradley is guarding the Alpine front, so I'm going to have him attack as well, just to keep those Italian divisions forcibly in place so they cannot redeploy to help out their brothers. And it shouldn't really take long for Italy to go the way of the dodo. I think all we need now is Turin, and that's going to be it. December of 1941, we've pretty much defeated the Axis. I haven't crushed Germany because I chosen not to. I want to deal with Italy first. If I had set my infantry to start grinding, we would have ground Germany into dust by now. But it is an expensive little thing, and I'd rather spend my strength a little more carefully. There it goes, Italy. Good. Omar Bradley can take care of whatever's left there. And I'm going to make use of the speed of this armor to get a bit of German land. See if we can get to Wels up there. Now, with Germany responding to its threat in the Alps, I am pulling the tanks away. Tanks really don't do well in mountains. I'll leave the infantry in place just as a holding force. I'm not gonna push into the mountains like that. I'm gonna redirect my armor towards the Low Countries. I'm gonna try and push up there to Wilhelmshaven, cut off as many divisions as I can around Amsterdam and Leeuwarden, and then swing that entire army towards Berlin. We are going to crush them under a weight of tanks and infantry. Should be a decently sized pocket, and with the Navy, we can also start convoy raiding that area just to prevent them from getting their troops out. Should be a respectable amount of troops we can kill here. Oh yeah, that is a good amount of divisions. Just disappearing. So yeah, our tanks are just going wild. And American tanks are already threatening Berlin. I can drive right in there. We've cracked the defenses wide. There's nothing Germany can do about us. They're fighting on way too many fronts, and they're fighting me. Oh, so many divisions encircled, and there goes Germany. We have ended the war. I really don't want to do this peace deal because it's going to be stupid either way, but let's just get it done. And there we go. I think this peace deal wasn't too stupid. If you look closely, you'll see the stupidity, but all in all, that was okay. Anyway, with this strategy and a little tweaks for your personal preference, you should be able to turn the United States of America into a global superpower. Nobody's going to be able to touch you, and we've not even untapped our full economic potential because look at all these factories I've not even been using. Look at all of our stockpiles after about a year of hard-fought war. I think it took about a year of grinding, and we've not really lost all that much. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoy the next one. See ya.